this is a really great opportunity for Americans to kind of maybe review what the Constitution is about. And the courts have made decisions throughout time that really were done because they just didn't want to wait till the people's elected representatives came through. This is a decision that if people really want to have abortion, they can have it, but they'll have it by way of their elected representatives at the state legislative level, and then they can have all the abortions that they vote for and that a governor signs. But if people say, that's really not a practice that we want to embrace and consider to be a wholesome way to deal with an unborn child, then those legislators in each of the states will say, there's a better way, and we're going to look for it. But it won't be just wholesale, wide-scale abortion up until the moment of birth, and in some states, actually beyond the point of birth itself, which I find barbaric and beyond disgusting that we would even talk about such a thing.
And joining us now is a familiar face to TBN viewers, Governor Mike Huckabee. Governor, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, my pleasure, Doug. Great to be with you today.
We've been talking a lot about this issue and the substance of the issue and what's going to do to abortion rights or lack thereof in this country. But let's turn to the political implications of this. This is a deeply divided country right now. Abraham Lincoln said that a house divided cannot stand. What happens to this issue, politically speaking, as far as the Democrats are concerned? Does it provide them the manna from heaven for the midterm elections that some on the left are suggesting it does?
I think they've made a big calculated mistake if they feel that this is somehow going to give them an advantage, because as it may rev up some of the left-wing voters to say, oh, abortion rights are ended, which is not true. That is a big lie, a really big lie. That's not what happens, even if Roe v. Wade is overturned. But it will also bring an enormous level of energy among so many of us who have been pro-life for decades and have felt that it's way past time that the court recognized that it overstepped itself by legislating from the bench in January of 1973 when it created Roe v. Wade. Should have never happened because there's no constitutional basis for it. The repeal of Roe v. Wade does not end abortion. It simply gives the decision of it back to the states. And ultimately what it means is that the people's elected representatives will be the ones who will decide the issue in each of the 50 states, as it should have been all along. Some states will have more abortion. Some states won't have any. I'd love to see the day come when there aren't any abortions because we forget about Roe v. Wade and start thinking about the 5th and 14th Amendment that says that you can't deprive a person of life or liberty without due process. And once we determine the biological reality, the scientific fact that an unborn child is a person, that'll be a turning point.
Right. This is a reminder to me in many respects, if in fact this decision holds up, as this draft copy suggests, of the brilliance of the founders. They realized that a country could become at some future point as divided as we are right now. And the solution they saw was the laboratory of the states.
It does mean also, Doug, that governors are going to have really the front row seat and be the leaders of what happens to the abortion policy. It was never really designed by the constitutional framers that every decision would be made in Washington. In fact, they viewed the Constitution as having a limited level of power reserved for the federal government, with most of the power left to the states. And that way, if one state gets it wrong, all 50 states don't get it wrong. And if one state gets it right, the other states will say, maybe that's the way we ought to be doing it. So by returning it to the states, we'll find out whether or not this is an advance for women's health care in states that want unlimited abortion, which I find hard to understand how that's health care when someone dies in the process of the procedure. Or is it that we have finally come to our moral senses and recognize that to take the life of an unborn child who is completely innocent for any reason, because it's an economic maybe burden or a social disruption to a person, that maybe that's not a good moral decision and not one that we want continue fostering.
That carefully balanced alignment that the founders desired and they wanted and they erected in its originality has fallen away, many would contend, in the present day, that too much power has been given to the federal government.
Way too much power to the federal government because, as I said before, the founders didn't see that the federal government having a centralized power would be a good idea. Mistakes would be multiplied among all the states. And so they wanted to have a country where the bulk of the power was left at the local level, where people were closest to the decisions being made. And the people who made the decisions would be held accountable for those decisions because they lived with and saw the very people that were both the makers of the decisions and the recipients of the impact of those decisions. This is a really great opportunity for Americans to kind of maybe review what the Constitution is about. And the courts have made decisions throughout time that really were done because they just didn't want to wait till the people's elected representatives came through. This is a decision that if people really want to have abortion, they can have it. But they'll have it by way of their elected representatives at the state legislative level, and then they can have all the abortions that they vote for and that a governor signs. But if people say, you know, that's really not a practice that we want to embrace and consider to be a wholesome way to deal with an unborn child, then those legislators in each of the states will say, there's a better way, and we're going to look for it. But it won't be just wholesale, wide-scale abortion up until the moment of birth, and in some states, actually beyond the point of birth itself, which I find barbaric and beyond disgusting that we would even talk about such a thing. America has the most liberal abortion laws in the world, with the exception of 7 other countries. Think about that. Even France has more protective laws regarding the unborn child than the United States, and that's pretty revealing to say that.
Let's turn now to another component of the politics of this, and we're already seeing it playing out today on the floors of Congress. Chuck Schumer saying words to the effect that he felt that he was lied to by many of the Trump picks during their confirmation hearings in their reverence for stare decisis, Supreme Court presidents, which they have now, in his words, thrown aside. Your view?
Well, Chuck Schumer knows better than that. He knows that the court precedent may have some weight, but ultimately what has weight is not precedent, it's Constitution. So if Chuck Schumer wants to put a mistake of the court over the Constitution itself and the text of the Constitution, Chuck Schumer needs to immediately resign his Senate seat and go back and engage in Civics 101 and understand that the decision of a court can be wrong. If Chuck Schumer really believes that, I guess he would somehow believe that the Dred Scott decision of 1845, or rather 1857, was a good decision. That was the precedent. That was the one that said that people of color, black people, were only 3/5 of a human being. Does he defend that? I'm pretty sure he doesn't. Does he defend the fact that women didn't have the right to vote until about 100 years ago? Does he think that's a great idea? That was precedent. But ultimately, those things got overturned because people decided that the words, the text, the spirit of the Constitution was more important than the way the precedent had been set by people who were protecting their interest rather than the equality of every single citizen of the United States.
And now to the leak itself. There are many who are suggesting that the leak was designed, indeed, to instill this cause for Democrats in the midterm elections. They need something to rally around. They can't look at Joe Biden's record as president of the United States or the Democrats' record leading Congress at this point. So they need an issue, and now they have it. But why now? Why would this leak happen now when it would have been issued, the decision would have been issued anyway, probably in late June, which is still 4 months before the midterm elections?
It's one of the head scratchers in this whole thing. Whoever leaked this must have thought that by revving up the left and making them think, oh, we've got to get to the streets and we've got to get to the polls, we're going to lose the abortion issue, that somehow that would take even people's attention off how much they're spending for gasoline and groceries. What I don't think that person understands, that as intense as are the pro-abortion people in this country who think that it is more important than life itself, which is ironic on its face, those of us who are pro-life are every bit as committed to the notion of protecting life because we believe that there's no such thing as a worthless life. We don't believe that it's possible to say we're Americans. We believe that all of us are created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and then say, but some people aren't as deserving as others to have those rights. Some people just aren't worth that much. Some people don't matter as much. For those of us who are pro-life, we believe the child with Down syndrome is every bit as important as is the captain of the high school football team. And we don't think there's such a thing as a person in this country that does not have intrinsic worth and value that is worth preserving and protecting. That's going to be the battle. And if the Democrats want that battle, I'll be more than happy to engage them from now to November and beyond.
To that point, Governor, many people on the left are really consummately ideal in what's the right way to describe this, compartmentalizing their feelings. You take, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement. You're asked frequently on the street, do you think Black Lives matter? And many people respond to that, say, oh, yeah, but then why do you abort so many of your babies?
Yeah. Well, it's one of the great ironies. Another one is the two things the Democrats have used over the past few months have been talking about the big lie, which is what they believe is talk about election rigging in 2020. And the second thing is insurrection, that people would try to circumvent and actually get in the way of the orderly and proper process of government. Well, what we have here is, number one, the big lie, the lie that somehow overturning Roe v. Wade ends abortion. It does not, just turns it to the state. And quite frankly, if what happened January 6th of 2021 was an insurrection, this is an insurrection as well. It's someone who took it upon themselves to overturn the processes of the Supreme Court and to try to circumvent the proper way in which court decisions are rendered. So I want to make sure that the left is going to be real clear. Maybe Nancy Pelosi will convene a panel. Maybe she'll investigate it. Put Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger on the panel as her pet Republicans so that they can really dig into this and find out who did it and make sure that they pay a heavy price for having leaked something, to most people's knowledge, for the first time in the history of the court.
Governor, explain to our viewers a little bit more in more detail why this is so precedent-setting, why this is so troubling, why this breaks with precedent. It seems to me that you could make a case, theoretically speaking, that this is just transparency. Somebody leaked this document. It's part of the process. It doesn't necessarily mean that the decision stands when the ultimate decision is issued in June. So why not be aware of that process and how the court goes about its work? How is it so damaging?
Well, in the first place, because everyone who works at the court takes an oath and they all agree that they will keep things confidential. And the reason that is important, quite simply, is that the bread's not baked yet. You don't put it on the shelf for consumption until it's finished and the recipe is completely agreed upon. This is a draft, so it's not the final version. We don't know if this is even where the draft stands now. It is the one, apparently, and it's been authenticated as the one that was circulating in February. But think of the chilling effect that this kind of leak will have on future cases where justices rightly need to be able to converse among themselves with great candor. They can't even argue their positions. They can't take their positions and try to win the side of the other one or to convince or persuade if they think that their every utterance is going to be leaked to the press. Sometimes those utterances are not ready for prime time. And that's what confidentiality is about. And Doug, I've often said to people who are entering politics, there are two absolutely irreplaceable virtues in politics. One is loyalty, and the other is confidentiality. If you can't be loyal to the person or the institution that has employed you, you don't belong in politics. And number two, if you can't keep your mouth shut and you can't keep a confidence, you have no place in the processes of politics and our government, because there's a time to release and time to disclose, but there's also a time to be able to deliberate with candor and honesty, knowing that those deliberations may in fact change over time, and the ultimate decision won't look anything like some of the initial deliberations would have made it to be.
So, last question for you, Governor. What does this do then to the alleged, vaunted collegiality of the Supreme Court?
It could shatter it, which would be very devastating, because even among the left and the right of the courts, you had famous relationships like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was one of the closest friends of the person considered the most right-leaning justice, Judge Scalia. They loved each other. They got along great. They disagreed. They argued. They debated. They deliberated together. But they also went out and had dinner together because they knew they could trust each other for their honesty and for their genuine, authentic convictions. If the Supreme Court turns into a mini version of Congress where people distrust each other from the beginning, it basically wrecks the institution. It destroys any hope that the institution will actually be 9 thoughtful people listening to each other, learning from each other's arguments, and the decisions will already be made before they ever walk into the room. They just simply take their own opinions. Their side is an echo chamber. The other side is an echo chamber. And it'll be divided right down the 6-3 or the 5-4 count, however it goes, which is a great travesty to what real justice should be about.
And such great wisdom on your part. We really do appreciate your wisdom. Governor, thanks so much for your time.
Doug, it's always a pleasure. Thank you, and congratulations on Centerpoint, a great addition to TBN.
Appreciate that, Governor. Thank you.